What if I told you that America is showing the exact same warning signs as every fallen empire in history? The U.S. is now more than 248 years old, and according to billionaire Ray Dalio's research, empires collapse after about 250 years. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a pattern that's repeated for centuries. In this StoryShots audiobook summary, you'll discover why high debt, money printing, and political division aren't random problems. They're predictable stages of decline that have happened to every major power before us. But here's the good news. Once you understand the pattern, you can prepare. Listen to find out how.
StoryShots book summary of Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order. Why Nations Succeed and Fail by Ray Dalio. Introduction.
The world is changing in big ways. Many of these changes feel new to us, but they've happened many times before in history. Things like political fights, huge government debts, growing gaps between rich and poor, and the rise of China as a world power. These all feel new and scary. But Ray Dalio, one of the world's most successful investors, shows us these changes follow patterns that have repeated for hundreds of years. In his book Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, he looks at how major powers like the Dutch Empire, British Empire, and American Empire rose to the top and then declined. He finds clear patterns that can help us understand what might happen next. What makes this book valuable is all the data behind it. Dalio's team studied 500 years of history, looking at everything from economic statistics to political events. Through charts and graphs, the book gives us a roadmap for what likely lies ahead. It especially focuses on the changing relationship between the United States and China and what it means for our future. I believe the world is changing in big ways that haven't happened before in our lifetimes, but have many times in history. So I knew I needed to study past changes carefully to understand what is happening now and what is likely to happen. Ray Dalio.
About the author.
Ray Dalio grew up in a middle-class family in New York City. His father was a jazz musician and his mother was a homemaker. He started investing when he was just 12 years old, using money he earned as a caddy at a local golf club. Even as a teenager, he was fascinated by the stock market. After college at C.W. Post and getting his MBA from Harvard Business School in 1973, Dalio founded Bridgewater Associates in 1975 from his two-bedroom apartment. The early days weren't easy. He once had to borrow $4,000 from his dad to pay his bills after making a bad market prediction. Today, Bridgewater is the world's largest hedge fund, managing around $150 billion. Dalio himself is worth billions and has been named one of the 100 most influential people by Time magazine. His success comes from his unique approach to understanding markets through studying historical patterns. What makes Dalio different from other investors is his focus on learning from history. He believes that by studying historical patterns, we can better prepare for the future. His company culture is also famous for what he calls radical transparency. The idea that everyone should speak honestly and openly, even when it's uncomfortable. In recent years, Dalio has stepped back from day-to-day management of Bridgewater to focus on writing and philanthropy. He has promised to give away more than half his wealth during his lifetime through the Dalio Foundation. His previous book, Principles, Life and Work, became a #1 New York Times bestseller and has been translated into over 30 languages.
StoryShot 1. History moves in clear patterns called the Big Cycle.
History isn't random. It follows patterns that repeat over and over. By studying how the Dutch, British, and American empires rose and fell, the book reveals what's called the Big Cycle. This cycle shows how nations rise to power and then eventually decline. It usually takes about 250 years for the full cycle to play out. Here's how it works. 1. First, a new order emerges after a period of conflict. 2. The country builds strong education, technology, and government systems. Third, it becomes more productive and financially successful. Third, it becomes a world power with military strength. 4. Eventually, problems develop. Too much debt, wealth gaps, and political division. 5. The country begins to decline. 6. Internal conflicts, like political fights, and external conflicts, like wars, happen. 7. Finally, a new order emerges, and the cycle starts again. No system of government, no economic system, no currency, and no empire lasts forever, yet almost everyone is surprised and ruined when they fail. Ray Dalio. Let's look at a real example: the Dutch Empire. In the 1600s, the Netherlands became the world's leading economic power. They had the best navy, the most innovative financial system, they invented the stock market, and dominated global trade. Amsterdam was the world's richest city. But by the late 1700s, internal problems and wars with England led to decline. The Dutch guilder, once the world's most trusted currency, lost its status. The British Empire then took over as the world's leading power. According to historical research from Yale University, these patterns of rise and fall have characterized empires from ancient Rome to modern America. Economic historian Niall Ferguson has also documented similar cycles in his work on the British Empire. Today's world order started after World War II. The United States became the dominant power, and the U.S. dollar became the world's main currency. According to the book's research, we are now in the late stages of this cycle. Many warning signs point to big changes ahead.
Story shot 2. 3 main forces drive these big changes.
There are 3 main cycles that work together to create the rise and fall of world powers. 1. The debt and money cycle. Countries take on more and more debt during good times. Eventually, they can't pay it back. When this happens, central banks often print money, which causes inflation and makes the currency worth less. Example: in the 1970s, the United States had high debts from the Vietnam War and social programs. The Federal Reserve printed more money, which led to high inflation. The value of the dollar fell, and prices for everyday goods shot up. Gas lines formed at service stations, and President Nixon had to take the dollar off the gold standard in 1971. More recently, in response to the 2008 financial crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic, the Federal Reserve has created trillions of dollars in new money. While this helped avoid economic collapse in the short term, the book warns it could lead to future inflation and currency devaluation. According to economists at the St. Louis Federal Reserve, government debt as a percentage of GDP has reached levels not seen since World War II. This aligns with the book's warning about where we are in the debt cycle. 2. The internal order-disorder cycle. As the gap between rich and poor grows and political divisions increase, countries experience more internal conflict. This can range from peaceful political changes to violent protests or even revolution. Example: the growing wealth gap in the United States has led to increasing political division. Both the Tea Party movement on the right and the Occupy Wall Street movement on the left arose from frustration with economic inequality. Political polarization has reached levels not seen since the Civil War era. Research from the Pew Research Center confirms this growing polarization. Their studies show that Americans are increasingly moving to political extremes, with fewer people holding moderate views. 3. The external order-disorder cycle. As powers rise and fall, they compete for global dominance. This can lead to trade wars, cold wars, or even hot wars. When an established power, like the U.S., is challenged by a rising power, like China, tension often results. Example: the recent trade disputes between the U.S. and China show this cycle in action. Both countries have placed tariffs on each other's goods as they compete for economic dominance. Beyond trade, There's increasing tension over technology like 5G networks, military influence in places like the South China Sea, and global leadership. Throughout time and across countries, financial crises happen about once every decade. Ray Dalio. When all three of these cycles hit problem points at the same time, major shifts in power usually follow. The book points out that all three cycles are in trouble spots today, creating a perfect storm for major change.
Story shot 3. 8 key factors determine a nation's power.
There are 8 clear factors that determine how powerful a country is. 1. Education. How well educated are the people? Countries with better education systems produce more innovation. Example, South Korea transformed itself from a poor country to a rich one, partly by focusing heavily on education. Today, over 70% of South Koreans aged 25 to 34 have college degrees, one of the highest rates in the world. This educational foundation helped Korea develop world-leading companies like Samsung and Hyundai. 2. Competitiveness. Can the country produce goods and services efficiently? Example, China became the factory of the world because it could make products more cheaply than other countries. While some of this advantage came from lower wages, China also built massive, efficient supply chains and infrastructure, like ports, roads, and factories, that made manufacturing more efficient. 3. Innovation and technology. Does the country create new ideas and technologies? Example, Silicon Valley in the United States has produced companies like Apple, Google, and Facebook that changed the world. America's culture of entrepreneurship, combined with strong universities and venture capital funding, created an innovation ecosystem that's hard to match. Economic output. How much does the country produce in total? Example, China's GDP has grown from $150 billion in 1978 to over $17 trillion today. This explosive growth lifted 800 million people out of poverty and created the world's largest middle class. 4th, trade. How much does the country trade with other nations? Example, Germany's success comes partly from being a major exporter, selling cars, machinery, and other products globally. Despite having a much smaller population than the US or China, Germany maintains global influence through its trade relationships. 5. Military strength. Can the country defend itself and project power? Example, the United States spends more on its military than the next several countries combined. It maintains hundreds of bases around the world and can project power anywhere on the planet. This military dominance has been a key part of American global leadership. 6th, financial center. Strength. Does the country have strong banks and financial markets? Example, London and New York remain the world's top financial centers, handling trillions of dollars in transactions daily. Their sophisticated financial systems, legal protections, and deep pools of capital make them attractive places to raise money and conduct financial business. 7. Reserve currency. Status. Do other countries use this nation's currency? Example, about 60% of all foreign exchange reserves worldwide are held in US dollars, giving America special privileges. The dollar's reserve status allows the U.S. to borrow money more cheaply and run larger deficits than other countries. Countries rise to power by being strong in these areas. They decline when they fall behind. For most of the 20th century, the United States led in all these categories, but China has been catching up quickly in recent decades.
Story shot 4. Reserve currency status is a special privilege.
When a country becomes dominant, its currency often becomes the reserve currency that other countries use for international trade and savings. This gives the country a huge advantage, what the book calls an exorbitant privilege. It can borrow money more easily and spend more freely than other nations. Reserve currency status allows a country to print money that others will hold, borrow at lower interest rates, have more financial power over other nations, finance bigger military spending and larger deficits. However, reserve currency status doesn't last forever. It follows the same rise and fall cycle as empires themselves. We've seen this happen with the Dutch guilder in the 1700s and the British pound in the 1900s. The life cycles of the world's leading currencies have averaged about 100 years. Ray Dalio. A real-world example. The British pound was the world's main reserve currency in the 1800s and early 1900s. British banks financed global trade, and most international contracts were written in pounds. But World War I and World War II left Britain with huge debts. The government had to print money to pay these debts, causing inflation. After World War II, the pound lost its place to the US dollar. Today, over 60% of global reserves are held in US dollars, but that percentage has been slowly falling. China's currency represents only about 2% of global reserves today, but is growing.
Story shot 5. The United States shows signs of an empire in decline.
According to the book's research, the United States shows many warning signs of an empire in its declining phase. 1. High debt. U.S. government debt has grown to over $30 trillion, or more than 120% of GDP. 2. Money printing. Since 2008, the Federal Reserve has created trillions of dollars in new money. 3. Wealth. Inequality. The richest 1% of Americans now own more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. 4th, political division. Americans are more politically divided than at any time since the Civil War. 5. Educational decline. While the U.S. once led the world in education, it now ranks middle of the pack in math, science, and reading compared to other developed nations. 6th, infrastructure decay. America's roads, bridges, airports, and other infrastructure are aging and inadequate compared to newer facilities in countries like China. The biggest threat to the United States is the United States itself, specifically its inability to get its financial house in order. Ray Dalio. However, the book notes that America still has many strengths. It has the world's strongest military, the leading reserve currency, and continues to lead in innovation. But the trends are concerning when viewed through the lens of history.
Story shot 6. China's rise follows historical patterns.
China's dramatic growth over the past 40 years isn't random or unique. It follows patterns seen in previous rising powers throughout history. The book shows how China has made incredible progress. In 1978, China made up just 2% of the world economy. Today, it's about 22%. The poverty rate has dropped from 96% to less than 1%. Life expectancy has increased from 41 years in 1949 to 77 years today. China now produces more STEM graduates than any other country. The World Bank has called China's economic rise the fastest sustained expansion by a major economy in history. The speed of China's growth is staggering. In 1990, China had no superhighways. Today, it has the world's largest highway network, 50% larger than America's. China now has more homeowners, internet users, and college graduates than any other country. China's rise over the past 40 years is one of the most remarkable economic transformations in history, following patterns we've seen in previous rising powers. Ray Dalio. China's rise is similar to America's rise in the early 1900s. Both countries rapidly developed their education systems, infrastructure, and industrial capacity. Both became manufacturing powerhouses before developing more advanced technologies. However, China also faces challenges. It has a rapidly aging population due to its former one-child policy. It remains an authoritarian state with significant restrictions on freedom. Its state-led economic model, while effective at mobilizing resources, can lead to inefficiency and corruption.
Story shot 7. Problems at home often lead to problems abroad.
There's a concerning pattern from history. When countries have internal problems, they often end up having external conflicts too. As wealth gaps grow and political fights intensify, societies become more vulnerable to extremism. Leaders sometimes focus on foreign enemies to distract from problems at home. These internal tensions can spill over into international relations. The relationship between the United States and China is especially important right now. The book warns that if both countries face significant internal problems at the same time, the risk of conflict between them grows much higher. History shows that shifts in world power rarely happen smoothly. The book examined 16 cases where an established power was challenged by a rising power. In 12 of those cases, the result was war. This makes the current transition particularly dangerous. The United States' relative power in the world has been declining for decades. History shows that this shift from one global power to another is a dangerous time. Ray Dalio. But there are also reasons for optimism. Unlike previous rival powers, the US and China are deeply interconnected economically. Both countries have nuclear weapons, making all-out war unthinkable. And modern communication allows for better understanding between cultures than in the past.
Story shot 8. How to prepare for the changing world order.
The book doesn't just describe problems, it offers practical advice for how individuals, investors, and policymakers can prepare for the transitions ahead. For individuals, develop skills that will be valuable regardless of which country leads. Consider learning Mandarin Chinese. Build relationships across cultural and national boundaries. Stay adaptable and ready to change course as the world changes. Don't keep all your assets in one currency or country. For investors, diversify across countries, not just across asset classes. Consider holding some gold as a hedge against currency devaluation. Look for opportunities in rising powers, not just established ones. Be cautious about holding too much debt. Study how different investments perform during previous transitions. For policymakers, address wealth inequality to reduce internal conflicts. Invest in education to maintain competitiveness. Find ways to cooperate with rivals on shared challenges like climate change. Study history to avoid repeating past mistakes. Manage the decline of power gracefully rather than fighting it. The biggest mistake that most people make is to judge what will be good by what has been good lately and what will be bad by what has been bad lately. Ray Dalio. The goal isn't to prevent change. That's impossible, but to navigate it successfully. Individuals and nations that understand these cycles will be better positioned to thrive during transitions. Final summary and your thoughts. Ray Dalio's Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order gives us a powerful framework for understanding history's patterns. By studying 500 years of rises and falls, the book helps us make sense of our current moment and prepare for what's ahead. There's a strong case that we're in the midst of a major shift in the world order. The United States shows many signs of an empire in its late stage, while China continues its rapid rise. This transition, combined with high debt, growing wealth gaps, and increasing political division, creates conditions similar to other major turning points in history. But the message isn't all doom and gloom. By understanding these patterns, we can better prepare for the changes ahead. The book ends with practical advice on how to position yourself during this transition, emphasizing the importance of diversification and adaptability. Success in a changing world depends on our ability to evolve and learn from history. Ray Dalio. The main lesson is that while change is inevitable, being surprised by it isn't. By studying history's patterns and preparing accordingly, we can successfully navigate even the biggest shifts in the world order. Now we'd love to hear from you. Which stage of the big cycle do you think your country is in right now? Many listeners have shared fascinating perspectives, some seeing clear warning signs of decline in their nations, while others notice patterns of ascent. What specific signs do you see in your own society? The political division in America? The rapid infrastructure growth in Southeast Asia? The debt problems in Europe? And thinking practically about your own life, if these historical patterns are correct, how might you change your personal or financial decisions? Some listeners have mentioned learning Mandarin, investing in emerging markets, or focusing on building location-independent skills. What assets or abilities do you think will become more valuable in the changing world order? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your insights might help fellow readers and listeners prepare for what's ahead, and we will feature the most thought-provoking responses in future book summaries. Rating. We rate Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order 4.5 out of 5. The book combines deep historical knowledge with practical wisdom in a way that's both easy to understand and powerful. While some might disagree with specific predictions, the framework helps us make sense of our rapidly changing world. The Financial Times praised the book as a provocative read. Dalio has a gift for pulling together the big forces of history. Bloomberg called it essential reading for anyone interested in the global economic landscape. Criticism of the book. Despite its thorough analysis, the book has faced several criticisms. Too deterministic. Some critics say the book's view of history is too mechanical, underestimating humanity's ability to learn and change course. They argue that unlike past cycles, today's leaders can study history and potentially avoid repeating mistakes. Western focus. Others suggest that while the book includes China in its analysis, it still looks at history mainly through a Western lens. The model might not fully capture the unique aspects of Chinese culture and governance. Not enough focus on technology. Some reviewers feel the book doesn't fully account for how technologies like artificial intelligence could change historical patterns. These technologies might create power dynamics different from those in the past. Limited solutions. While the book is good at identifying problems, some critics say it offers fewer concrete solutions for how countries like the United States could reverse their decline. Despite these criticisms, most reviewers praise the book's valuable insights on historical patterns and how they relate to today's global challenges. Recommended books from Story Shots. If you enjoyed this summary, you might also like these titles available on Story Shots. Principles, Life and Work by Ray Dalio, Dalio's first bestseller that shares his unconventional principles for life and business success. Why Nations Fail by Darren Acemoglu and James A. Robinson. A fascinating exploration of why some nations prosper while others fail, focusing on the role of institutions. 21 Lessons for the 21st Century by Yuval Noah Harari. A thoughtful exploration of today's most urgent issues as we move into the uncharted territory of the future. Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. A groundbreaking narrative of humanity's creation and evolution that explores how biology and history have defined us. The Black Swan by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. An exploration of how unpredictable events massively impact our world and how we can build robustness against them. Anti-Fragile by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Learn how some systems thrive and grow when exposed to volatility, randomness, and disorder. Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. A compelling explanation of how geographical and environmental factors shaped human history. Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari. A provocative exploration of humanity's future and potential new forms of inequality. Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. An examination of the factors that contribute to high levels of success. The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. A comprehensive guide to understanding how power works in society and how to navigate it. The Ascent of Money by Niall Ferguson. A journey through the evolution of money and how financial history has shaped civilization. The Fourth Turning by William Strauss and Neil Howe. The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers by Paul Kennedy.